Working the night shift as a security guard at an old abandoned building set for demolition was a lonely gig. But my job was simple: patrol the premises and make sure no urban explorers or vandals decided to venture into the hazardous structure. It was easy money, with the playoff being that the place was eerie as hell. It was an old hospital that was going to get flattened to make way for some luxury apartment complex or something of that nature. There was such a bad vibe I got being there, unlike anywhere I had worked as a guard before. The way the darkness clung to the dilapidated walls and the shadows danced in the flickering light of my flashlight all just seemed out of sorts. From the moment I stepped into the building each night, a feeling of unease settled over me. I used to stroll about these kind of buildings, trying to kill time, but here I would rush around as quickly as I could just to get back to my site office. The air of the place reeked with the scent of decay and dampness. My footsteps echoed through the empty halls, and the occasional creaks and groans of the old structure played tricks on my imagination. The routine patrols were monotonous, and they took a sinister turn as strange occurrences became a regular part of my nights. The motion lights installed to catch any intruders were suddenly flared to life. Each time I would rush to the source, expecting to find someone lurking in the darkness, but the building stood empty, its silence broken only by the echoes of my own footsteps. The CCTV cameras dotted around the building were my eyes in the dark, or so they were supposed to be. One night, as I sat in the security office watching the monitors, figures appeared on the screen that shouldn't have been there, in areas with only one way in, one way out. Every time I go to investigate, there would be nobody in sight, and no sign of anyone having ever been there at all, leaving me questioning my own sanity. As the weeks passed, the strange happenings escalated. On multiple occasions I could swear I heard distant whispers as I patrolled the echoing hallways, whispers that seemed to materialise from the walls, carrying with them an otherworldly chill. But every time I stopped walking, there was nothing to be heard, just like they were trying to mask themselves against my footsteps. I dismissed them as a product of my overactive imagination, a consequence of the isolation and the unnerving environment. But on one particular night, as I made my regular rounds, the whispers intensified. I couldn't discern the words, but the voices seemed to converge, surrounding me in an instinctive murmur. I quickened my pace, more than usual, as I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched. In the security office, the CCTV screens flickered, and the figures appeared again, closer to the cameras this time, like they had the intention of wanting to be sought out and caught. Their features were distorted and pixelated on the screens, with shadows playing tricks on their shapes. I couldn't tear my gaze away. They looked like they were trying to find a way out, darting across the screens, and they almost looked like they were pawing at the walls. Junkies, I thought to myself. In all my time, these people were the worst to deal with, and you had to be especially careful carrying them out, as you don't know what they could have on them that might stick you if you aren't too careful. I stormed out of the office with as much protective equipment as I could use, ready to confront these people, but as I made my way down the corridor to where the supposed intruders were, the place was deathly silent, with no trace of anyone in the area. I knew what I saw on the screens, and someone was definitely there. My mind was definitely not playing tricks on me. No way. Yet I couldn't explain where the people on the screen had gone. It was like they had simply evaporated into thin air. Now, I've always been a believer in the paranormal, but never witnessed it firsthand. But this was the only explanation I had, other than me being completely insane. As the weeks dragged on, the once familiar routine became a descent into the abyss of the unknown. I had sleepless days thinking about going back to that place, and what I had been seeing when I was there. The spectral occurrences gnawed at the edges of my sanity. Each night was a test of endurance and anxiety levels, with every night being filled with the strange occurrences. It got to the point where I just ignored a lot of what I heard or saw from the office. Besides, I knew that it wasn't like the demolition crews wouldn't do a sweep of their own before doing the demo anyway. Then finally the day came that the demolition crews showed up. They were here to tear down the building at last, bringing with it my eerie nights to an end. I never watched the demos before, but I watched this one from the point of view of getting closure in a sense, I guess. You could hear the heavy machinery making a racket, drowning out the creepy stuff that used to bother me. The wrecking ball swung, smashing through the place, and with each hit it felt like it was shaking out all the hidden mysteries. The whole cursed spot fell apart, and the messed up walls gave into the machines doing their thing. Once the dust had settled, all that was left was a big pile of rubble, like the memories of that freaky stuff got buried under it. That was it for my gig as the night guard at that spooky joint. They sent me off to some other place, but the weirdness of that building stuck with me. Those figures, the lights acting up, the whispers that made no sense. They were like echoes in my head, further cementing my belief in the paranormal. No building since has been like that, and I am hopeful it will continue to stay that way. Experiencing it once was enough, and I hope to never have to experience it again. Working the front desk at night in a hotel for the first time was a bit unnerving, but I figured it would be an easy shift. Most guests were already settled into their rooms, and the tasks involved little more than checking in the occasional late arrival or handling the odd request. The lobby was quiet, the hum of the fluorescent light creating a subdued atmosphere. I spent most of my time scrolling through social media, the glow of my phone the only source of light in the dimly lit foyer. It was around 2 a.m. when a woman in a white dressing gown approached the reception desk. Her disheveled appearance hinted at a restless night, and her eyes held a weariness that seemed out of place for the hour. She complained about noisy guests in the room next door, and mentioned that the disturbance had been going on for some time. I assured her that I would address the issue, and asked for her room number. "I'm in 43, she replied, her voice edged with frustration. "You better do something about it." I jotted down the room number, and assured her I would handle the situation promptly. As she walked away, I'll admit, I mouthed off behind her back. I wasn't happy about how she spoke to me. It wasn't like I could control all the guests with the flick of a switch. Besides, the night had been so quiet. If I'd heard of anything, I would have dealt with it myself. I checked the room number and the booking in the register, and it was a couple staying in room 44. A mischievous grin crept onto my face as I assumed the noise was likely of an intimate nature. I winked to myself, thinking I knew exactly what was going on behind that door. As I headed up to the couple's room, preparing to politely ask them to keep it down, as I approached I heard nothing. The usual sounds of a couple engaging in amorous activities was conspicuously absent. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to listen at the door. Silence. Confused, I hesitated. Maybe they heard me coming and stopped whatever they were doing. I decided not to knock, thinking that the issue had resolved itself. I walked the short distance to the room next door, planning to inform the woman in room 43 that the matter had been dealt with. I knocked on room 43, expecting a grateful guest on the other side. Instead, a muffled voice from within shouted, "Leave me alone." Shocked, I stepped back, realising that something was off. I insisted I was there to help, but she yelled again for me to go away. The next day my manager asked how the night shift had gone. I recounted the disturbance and mentioned the woman in room 43. The manager decided to offer her a complimentary free breakfast as an apology for the inconvenience. She grabbed the guest book to find the woman's name, intending to accompany the breakfast voucher with a personal apology letter. But when she flipped to the page for room 43 on this particular night, there was no booking. The room was meant to be unoccupied, and my manager's confusion mirrored my own. Determined to get to the bottom of it, we went up to room 43. We lightly knocked on the door. Nothing. Not a whisper. We opened up the door to reveal a perfectly made bed and the room tidy and untouched. There was no sign that anyone had ever been there. Baffled, we checked the CCTV footage from that night. The timestamp showed me getting up from the reception desk around the same time the woman should have been standing before me. But no woman was present on the CCTV footage, just me standing there talking to the empty foyer. The realisation hit both of us simultaneously, and a wave of unease settled in the pits of our stomachs. We were left feeling completely spooked by the inexplicable events of that night. I said that I was never going to work a night shift again, and eventually it was agreed that the night shifts would no longer be done alone. Nothing like what happened has ever reoccurred to anyone on the night shift, or the day shift for that matter, but none of us ever looked forward to turning down room 43. Working as a night porter at St Mary's Hospital wasn't the most glamorous job in the world, but it paid the bills. My nightly routine consisted of wheeling patients to various departments, emptying trash cans, and keeping the corridors clean. Most nights it was quiet and uneventful, but one week things took a turn for the eerie. I'll never forget the first sign that something was amiss. It was a Tuesday night, and I was in the basement making my rounds to check the morgue. The lights down there gave the corridor a gloomy and otherworldly atmosphere. I'd never been a superstitious person, but as I walked through the dimly lit corridors, my mind always liked to conjure up spooky scenarios. When I reached the morgue, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of dread. The door, which was always locked at this hour, was wide open. I approached cautiously, expecting to come across one of the morticians or a student working late. But as I walked past the room, it was completely empty, but the room reeked with the unmistakable odour of formaldehyde. If you don't know what that smells like, just imagine walking into a room filled with open jars of pickles. Inside the morgue was empty, or at least it appeared that way. The stainless steel tables were neatly lined up, no bodies in sight, thank God. But one of the examination lights was left on over one of the tables, which was also odd considering the lack of anyone being down there. As I went to shut off the light, I heard the sound of something metallic falling to the ground from one of the instrument tables, and I was done. At that point I hastily made my way to the exit and locked the morgue doors behind me, and that was that for the first night. As the weeks went on, more unsettling events began to unfold. On Wednesday night I was in the hospital's old wing, which was rarely used, but the sound of squeaking wheels echoed through the corridor. Now half of the wheelchairs and beds squeaked in that place, so it wasn't out of the ordinary. But as I went around the corner expecting to bump into one of the other nurses or night porters, I was greeted with an empty corridor. There was nobody there. Just the usual row of hospital beds sat motionless lined up along the edge of the corridor. I played it off as maybe hearing it from one of the other floors or something, but my unease was definitely growing, first the morgue and now this. But Thursday night is when things got truly bizarre. As I was making my rounds, I passed by a room with a flickering fluorescent light. Anything like that I was supposed to flag up for building management, so I stopped to investigate. The door was ajar and the room was dimly lit. When I peeked inside, I saw someone sitting on the edge of the bed. It was a woman in a tattered hospital gown. Her face was obscured by her long dark hair. I called out to say, "Hi, sorry for the intrusion. I'm just going to report this light for you," but she didn't respond. It was as if she were frozen in place and seemed transfixed on the wall. So I decided to enter the room to make sure that she was okay, and of course to note down and report this light. As I walked over to where the woman was sitting to make sure everything was okay with her, I reached out to put my hand on her shoulder, intended to ask if she needed assistance. But just as my fingers brushed her gown, the lights flickered, and when they came back on, she was gone. The bed was empty, and the stench of formaldehyde filled the air. My body surged with adrenaline. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened to me. I didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. I rushed to leave the room, my heart pounding in my chest, when I suddenly collided with a colleague in the hallway. We both tumbled to the ground. I could see a concerned expression. She extended a hand to help me up and said, "Whoa, it looks like you've seen a ghost." Her words sent a shiver down my spine as I struggled to catch my breath. With a shaky voice I replied, "You wouldn't believe what I just saw in that room. It was like something out of a horror story." I was desperate to make her understand the chilling experiences that had been plaguing me throughout the week. Her face paled as she listened to my account, and for a moment she seemed as spooked as I felt. But she insisted it must have been my mind playing tricks on me, as she also brought up the strong smell of formaldehyde and how it can cause you to have hallucinations. I argued my case. "Why does this one room smell of it?" I questioned, but she had no answer. I think she just wanted a logical explanation, as did I. Now from that moment each night, the strangeness escalated. On Friday I heard whispers echoing through the hallways. The voices were faint and I couldn't make out the words. And every time I would have these encounters, the stench of formaldehyde was heavy in the air. By Saturday night I was seriously spooked. I had taken to avoiding certain areas of the hospital altogether, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The other staff members noticed my growing unease, but I just told them it had been a rough week. I didn't want them to think I'd gone insane, as it seemed my other colleague already had, and besides, telling them it had been a rough week was no word of a lie. It had by all accounts been a truly rough week, especially trying to fathom what had been going on. On Sunday night, as I was making my rounds, I passed by the room where I'd encountered the woman on the bed earlier in the week. This time the room was well lit, as the light had seemingly been fixed. So I plucked up the courage to do the usual checks and empty the bins, but as I stepped into the room I heard a soft, mournful whisper. "You should have never come here." That was the final straw for me. No job was worth this torment. I turned around to leave, but the door slammed shut, and the room plunged into darkness once more. I fumbled for my flashlight and shone it around the room, revealing nothing but the empty hospital beds. The voices continued to whisper, growing louder and more insistent. Panic set in as I wrenched at the door, before my weight finally made it give way and swing open, allowing me to escape. I left my job as a night porter at St. Mary's Hospital that night, never looking back. And to this day, I can't forget the eerie events that unfolded in those dark, silent corridors. Whether it was a manifestation of my imagination or something more sinister, I may never know, but I've never set foot in that hospital again.